Hey all. So, this combined with a Titania Spotlight are my first two CCP videos ever. And what I'm intending to do here is basically making a guide for these champions that have not dropped yet. These are going to follow the same general format as those videos that I have made in the past, where we're going to go through the abilities and I'm going to try and put them in context based on my experience playing them, because since I have access to them on the CCP, I have done that. I have a pretty good idea how these abilities feel. So I'm going to skip over the bio, despite the fact that it's pretty cool, and I'm going to try and distill this mechanics section here. Feel free to pause, read it through. There's a lot of really good stuff here. But essentially, what the designer was trying to do was to make a character that was clearly a Doctor Doom. Like, clearly had a lot in common with the original character, but different. More interactable on defense, a little bit less oppressive, and just in general feeling much more like a tech champion than a mystic. So there are some things in common: the high armor, the shock resistance, the shocks in general, the Doom heavy, but there's also going to be some differences. So let's get into the actual kit, but first we have to pause and talk about the stats real quick. Not the health of the attack, but the fact that we have a new Prestige King. There are going to be mixed reactions to this. I know there are, because if you spent a lot of money getting up a Silver Surfer and you thought that, well, that's, I'm safe going on, and now there's somebody who has higher prestige, that can feel bad. I know it can. But the way the game is built is that prestige is monetized, and therefore sig stones, sig levels, are monetized. And so personally, I would rather see prestige continue to climb incrementally, because that means that we should be seeing more sig stones. And that's very important to me because it allows us to invest in characters like Captain America Infinity War, like Omega Red, those other champions that need Sig Stones but do not have competitive prestige. Now, of course, you can just not play in an alliance where prestige matters, but for those of us who do want those AQ rewards, I think it is nice for the economy to be structured in a way such that we actually have some sig stones that we can put into non-prestige options, and that means prestige has to go up. It also means that I badly want him on my roster because my alliance does care about prestige. So moving on to the actual abilities, our first one here is extremely tech, right? With air quotes. So instead of landing critical hits normally, Infamous Iron Man instead inflicts instant shocks. So these are kind of like Guardian's instant shocks, and like those, I'm pretty sure that these function the way all crit replacers do, and they actually ignore crit resistance. You can test this if you use Guillotine 2099 against Doctor Doom. Her crit rate is not as high as Doom's crit resistance, and therefore she should not be able to ever crit against him, but her degens that replace critical hits do land. So this should get through even those kinds of obstacles. We also have this bit about energy vulnerabilities. This does not come up often, because there are not a whole lot of defensive triggers that allow the opponent to gain 2 or more prowess effects at once. Most of those triggers actually rely on you hitting the opponent as a mutant. That's where most of the prowesses are. And so this will make it a very bad idea to attack him using a mutant. On offense, this primarily serves to just hose Bishop. Because remember that energy vulnerability is going to be stronger than energy resistance. 900 negative energy resistance is a larger effect than 900 positive energy resistance, just because of how diminishing returns works. And so when you're facing somebody like Bishop, you inflict instant shocks, you inflict energy damage in general against him, and he starts trying to gain all of these prowess at once. Those are going to turn into energy vulnerabilities and magnify Infamous Iron Man's damage across the board, while also keeping Bishop from ramping up and as easily going unblockable. This is just very, very good for keeping him under control and cutting through him quickly. It is very satisfying to play. Bishop is so annoying on defense. It is time we had a hard counter, and Infamous Iron Man truly is one. So talking about his armor up buff, this is another way that he is different than Doom. It's not just he has very high armor and crit resistance permanently. He actually has an active armor up buff. Now this also means that he can take on somebody like Havoc, whereas OG Doom cannot. But this does make him vulnerable to armor break, so be careful with those kinds of effects. But while you have it, you also have immunity to shock and incinerate, which is a fairly rare combo, and that's great. Every time we have a rare immunity combo, it ends up mattering. So I'm happy to see another one here. And as it says, if you lose the buff, it comes back. If he's armor broken, it doesn't start coming back until the armor break goes away. So really do not use him against like special burst lockdown. It's not going to be a good time. This is also an easy way to shut him down on defense. But if you can keep it up, you don't really have to worry about it beyond that. Out of his basic attacks, his medium attacks are non-contact hits. This is something you have to remember when he's a defender. It means you cannot parry his mediums unless you have a champion that can specifically parry non-contact hits, like a Proxima Midnight or somebody. They inflict shocks, like Doom's, and you can charge a heavy attack, like Doom's, as long as the opponent is close enough and suffering from a shock. This consumes the shocks, stuns them, and therefore allows you to safely land the rest of the heavy attack, even if you do this from within a combo. So the final hit of the heavy attack inflicts this Cowardice debuff. This is a pretty chunky Cowardice, reduces special attack damage by 40%, and also is just going to turn off Kitty Pryde's defensive kit. So that's quite nice, makes him tankier on top of his armor, cool little ability. And when the shocks are consumed, he triggers Aura of Iron for a little bit. Now, 2.6 seconds is not a long time, but this is going to let you quickly get into the aura during your heavies, because those consume shocks, right? I also want to point out that the heavy charge consumes a shock even if the opponent is stun immune. So if you can safely charge that heavy attack and you don't necessarily need to stun your opponent, you can activate the Aura of Iron, which is important because I'm just going to skip down to the third bullet point here. While the Aura of Iron is active, his special attacks are unblockable. This means that you can charge your heavy even if the opponent is stun immune, consume the shocks, go into the aura, and as long as you are fast enough, even if your opponent is stun immune, you can throw your special as long as you have enough power. It will be unblockable, and it will almost certainly land. So that's a fun little trick with him that I very much personally enjoy. Now, the Aura of Iron cannot trigger while he doesn't have his armor up. That's kind of like how OG Doom's Aura of Hazareth cannot trigger if he is either slowed or inflicted with a Petrify. And this is an interesting thing. Its duration is reduced by 4 seconds for each unique non-prowess buff on the opponent above 2. That's a lot of text, but what this means is that if Infamous Iron Man, I'm going to do that again. If Infamous Iron Man's opponent has 3 unique buffs, excluding prowess, then the aura is going to be shorter. At a 4-second reduction, this basically means that on attack, you cannot do the heavy cancel into the short aura, because it just will not happen. And on defense, this means that if you are attacking Infamous Iron Man with somebody who has 4 or more unique buffs outside of prowess, then he actually doesn't trigger the aura on his special 1, making him a lot easier to deal with because he's not going to go unblockable. So you can get around him even without armor break if you have enough different buffs. Obviously, cosmics are usually the best ones at having a lot of buffs, so this is very appropriate to the class wheel. Makes a lot of sense there. Just something to keep in mind if you're trying to use him for certain fights. So it's paused during both champion special attacks, unlike Doom's just being paused during his. Remember that. But if he lands a medium while it's paused, which basically means if you punish the opponent's special attacks while the aura is active, it ends the aura early. Now, that might strike you as a weird clause, but the reason for this is that giving Infamous Iron Man a way to end the aura early allows him to get back into inflicting shocks with his mediums and do the whole heavy cancel thing. You don't have to do this because you do not have to punish the opponent's specials. You can hold on to your aura longer, but this is to give you an out for that. So just be aware that this mechanic is here, and if you are trying to keep your aura up for a long time, don't punish the opponent's specials. So whenever he lands one of his shocks while the aura is up, instead of a shock, you get this power burn. So I do want to point out that power burn is something that has a variable potency. This is an ability that doesn't always do the same amount of damage per unit of power burned, but this one in particular is a little easier to parse than something like the visions because they're telling you this is how much energy damage is done for percent of power burned on the opponent. It's not too crazy because it is more damage than it is power control from playing it. And then also becomes passively unstoppable and stun immune against the last hit of an incoming special 1, 2, and heavy attacks. Again, that's a lot of text, but this is the same ability that Doom has in the Aura of Hazareth, which allows him to resist knockdowns effectively. And if the damage of that hit exceeded 5% of his maximum health, Doom just caps it. But instead what Infamous Iron Man does is he gets this regeneration buff, restoring the excess. So this can mean that he actually takes less damage than Doom does, because this excess damage is calculated before the Recovery Mastery boosts regen. So if you take a really big hit, you can actually heal a bit from it, but I wouldn't go chasing that because you still do actually take the hit. And if your opponent can heal block you or remove the regeneration buff or anything like that, then this is still a problem for you. But that is a nice little, very tech twist, because tech champions have a fair number of regen buffs on Doom's ability. So for the special one, this, like Doom's, turns on the aura for 8 seconds. And if the aura was already active, it special locks the opponent. This developer note here is really good, because this can be a reliable way to keep the opponent from going red. You have to be a little bit careful with it, but that 2.6 seconds on the aura is long enough to heavy cancel, land another medium, and because that guaranteed shock turns into a power burn, you can get them off of going red. I would be very careful with that, because if they don't give you an opening after the special one, you might be in trouble. But the special one itself will often crit and power burn. So this is still a form of power control. It's just not quite as automatic as Doom's. Tends to do a bit more damage though. So for the special 2, after the first hit of this attack, the entire rest of the special gains a bunch of attack rating for how much power the opponent has. And that is locked in for the rest of that. So if you throw this when your opponent has 3 bars of power, the first hit won't do a lot. But then all of the beam hits after that first hit are going to gain a ton of attack rating because your opponent has 3 full bars of power. Each one of those beam hits is going to inflict a shock, and as long as you're in the aura, those shocks are instead going to be big old critical power burns. Is going to do a ton of damage. It is a lot of fun. Pushing the opponent to special 3 and then heavy canceling into a special 2 is probably the single most fun thing that you can do with Infamous Iron Man, in my personal opinion. I absolutely love it. So, moving on to Special 3, again, this has shades of Doom, but is a bit different. You get a long aura of iron. This one cannot be ended early, so you don't have to worry about punishing the opponent's special attack. That is only for the shorter auras. And you get this big old critical rating for the opponent's filled bars of power. So, although this doesn't stun the way that Doom's does, and therefore you don't have a guaranteed opening to go and wail on them, if this pushes them red, if you can throw this so that it just takes them to under 3 bars of power, then this is going to feel really great because you get this huge critical rating, and now you're doing a ton of critical power burns. Like it says, if the aura was already active, such as if you heavy canceled into it, then you get an energized passive, lasting until it next expires. Now, giving both champions an energized passive could sound weird, like it says here, but that's because that's just more power for you to burn. And then you also want to take into account that because this aura lasts for 24 seconds, it's actually very easy to go back to the special 1 after this, especially if you have that energize. Throw the special 1 with the long aura already active and special lock the opponent, so then you can just wail on them and push them really high in their power, do a ton of damage with your power burns, and not worry about them hitting you. You just want to make sure you hold on to some tool to keep them from going red once that special lock expires. And I've actually already seen some misunderstandings about this Special 3, Special 1 loop online, because it's not completely clear from reading this. But when you go Special 3, Special 1, then that still counts as the same aura, so your Special 1 inflicts the power lock for the remainder of the 24 seconds. If in that 24 seconds you get back up to the Special 3, that reactivates the aura for 24 seconds. It does not refresh the current aura, and that distinction is very important because it means your special lock goes away. So because the Special 3 does not have a stun, do not try to go Special 3, Special 1, race to the Special 3, and throw it while the opponent is red. You are going to eat a special attack if you do that. As long as you understand that difference, though, there's a lot of fun to be had with this. So then for the signature ability, there are a few interesting things here. One, you have that classic Iron Man arcane overload instead of arc overload. I like that. This is just a really powerful regen. 35% over 10 seconds is really strong, especially because that gets boosted by recovery. This makes him an excellent questing champion, and it passively special locks the opponent, so you have an extra little window of control to try and get the fight back on your terms. While the aura is active, the opponent also loses the ability to throw unblockables for the most part. This is very nice. It's another thing that hoses Bishop, even if you have managed to give him prowess, but it's also just nice for a whole bunch of other abilities. Unblockable is generally scary. Being able to throw your Special 1 or your Special 3, turn the aura on, and just completely shut off unblockable abilities, again, makes him quite safe. And then here's the extra Doom part. As long as he has that armor up buff active, and you're never going to take him against an opponent that armor breaks you, you get block proficiency and energy resistance. Reminds you of Doom. So, like we talked about, he's very good at keeping the opponent off a Special 3. It's not quite the same as Doom. You're not going to have quite the same cycle. But if all you need is to keep the opponent from throwing a Special 3, it's not going to be that hard for you. He's fantastic at multiple prowess buffs. So, this, again, doesn't trigger against a lot of mutant champions. There are a few nodes where it triggers. But it absolutely destroys Bishop, and that alone is worth it. And then he's very survivable because he has a lot of the same resistances Doom has, and that big regen. It's very, very nice. But as we talked about, don't take him into a fight where he's going to lose that armor up. It's very important. Put this one on the same shelf as Guardian, as Silver Centurion. If that armor up buff is going to get nullified or broken, just don't do it. And pretty much all of his abilities are keyed into shocks, so don't use him against a shock immune opponent. Most shock immunity is in the Cosmic class. This again does make sense, the same as a lot of unique buffs, mostly in the Cosmic class. Now let's talk about his synergies, because these are awesome. So, similar to Doom, he does have solo synergies. You get this extra crit damage rating for each knocked out team member. Reminder that because his critical power burns take into account critical damage rating, this is going to boost all of your power burns, including the big ones on the special 2s. I really like Atonement here. This is kind of a flavorful spin on what Magneto House of X has, another villain turned hero. You get 8% attack rating for heroes, similar to Magneto, and 20% ability accuracy for robots. Now, this might seem kind of weird, because most robot abilities have a 100% chance to trigger, but this is going to let any robot on the team get around a single disorient from Hard Knock Life, so you can safely parry without worrying about your next parry. It's also going to make any robot automatically a counter for Domino. This Iron Mantle one, just making everybody's armor up effects better. Sweet. Everyone gets tankier. This also combos really nicely with War Machine's pre-fight that gives energy resistance based on armor rating, because it will effectively give more energy resistance to anyone who starts the fight with a big ol' armor up. This one with Doctor Strange, cowardice effects being stronger just means you have to worry even less about specials, makes it easier for him to block big ones without worrying about them chipping down. And then this Doctor Strange one is really interesting, because refreshing blessings means that you can actually have more than one active at once. And this is going to let Doctor Strange kind of go relatively, it's still an older kit, go relatively Super Saiyan and keep all of his blessings up at once. That's going to let you have that health steal, the extra damage. It's going to let you do armor breaks and weaknesses on the special 2 if you get to that with it. This is a very cool synergy, and it makes Strange pretty fun to play. So for these trust issues, this is almost entirely defensive for Torch, but it does make it that much funnier if you're using Torch to just beat a Mystic by them hitting you rather than the other way around. I love this one for Thing, because that's just going to get you ramped up to your 60 Furies that much faster. And the one for Mr. Fantastic is, I need this guy on my roster so bad. It basically turns Mr. Fantastic into Mephisto for the start of the fight, and you just completely stop buffs. Or, sorry, you stop the buffs that have a 100% chance to proc or less for 15 seconds, which gives Reed enough time to get his staggers online if he needs to control the buffs further. And then I was so excited for Reed's part of this synergy that I actually forgot to talk about Infamous Iron Man's side of it, which is extra crit rating while the opponent has 2 or more bars. This is going to allow you to much more reliably power burn with your special 1 or even with your heavy. Anything that allows you to get into the aura, if it's more likely to crit, it's more likely to shock, it's more likely to replace that shock with a power burn, and it gives you better power control, again, for keeping the opponent off the special 3. So, this one for Penny Parker is insanely strong for both of them. We talked about how much trouble Infamous Iron Man has against shock immune champions. Anyone who's played with Penny Parker knows that she just shuts down from a damage standpoint against Incinerate immune champions. This lets both of them have access to the other type of energy damage. So against someone who is immune to both, like another Infamous Iron Man or an Icarus, They're both still out of luck, but for the vast majority of the contest, this just means they cannot be shut down by immunity. Very fun synergy. And then this last one, which should say it's with Mephisto, is very, very good for Mephisto, because one of the biggest problems that Mephisto has as a relatively low damage character is that if he runs out of souls, he runs out of special ones, and therefore he basically runs out of buff control. By making all of his soul imprisonments twice as long, it doubles the total amount of time that he can keep his total lockdown of buffs, and just makes him a lot more viable for longer fights, which he needs because he doesn't do that much damage. This one for Infamous Iron Man is okay. It means that if you're fighting somebody like Torch or maybe a hazard shift node that's putting shocks on you, you're going to do a bit more damage to them. But because it's reduced by 20% each time, this isn't going to, get fully out of control. This isn't going to be how you're killing the opponent in a fight you otherwise wouldn't win. So that's Infamous Iron Man. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'm really excited for him to come to the contest. And yes, Prestige is part of it. And yes, for those of you who are familiar with my channel, his synergy with Reed is a huge, huge part of it. But he's also legitimately fun to play. I like tech champions that can't crit. I like power burns. I like when effects that haven't been critical before are made critical. And he just looks cool. So, looking forward to this one. Good luck for any of you that decide to go for him, and let me know in the comments what you thought of this. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and take care.